Police officer sets fire to black boy's clothes, not knowing who his mother was. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now brace yourselves for a story that will leave you breathless. In the sweltering heat of a July afternoon in Chicago's South Side, 12-year-old Marcus played carefree with his friends on a narrow street lined with worn brick buildings. Their laughter echoed off the walls, a stark contrast to the underlying tension that permeated the neighborhood. Marcus's mother, Angela Davis, no relation to the famous activist, was a respected figure in the community, a brilliant lawyer known for defending residents' rights against authority abuse. At that moment, she was in her makeshift office, preparing another case against the police brutality plaguing the area. Meanwhile, Sergeant John Reynolds patrolled the neighborhood in his squad car, his face hardened by years of service and deep-seated prejudices, his vigilant eyes fixed on the group of children, particularly on Marcus. Suddenly, a scream cut through the air. "Thief! Catch the thief!" An elderly woman frantically pointed at a young man running towards the group of children. Sergeant Reynolds, without hesitation, slammed on the brakes and leaped from the car, drawing his weapon. In the ensuing chaos, Marcus found himself in the middle of the commotion. The actual suspect had already disappeared, but Sergeant Reynolds, blinded by rage and prejudice, grabbed Marcus's arm with brutal force. "You're gonna learn not to steal, boy!" the officer shouted, his voice laden with hatred. In a shocking act of violence, he pulled a lighter from his pocket and ignited it dangerously close to Marcus's t-shirt. Time seemed to freeze. Marcus's wide eyes reflected the flame's glow, while his friends watched, paralyzed with horror. The smell of burning fabric began to spread, mixing with the muffled screams of children and Sergeant Reynolds' curses. No one there knew that just a few blocks away, Angela had just left her office, hurrying home, eager to see her son. She had no idea of the nightmare she was about to encounter. As the flames began to lick Marcus's clothes, an authoritative and familiar voice cut through the air like a knife. "Stop immediately!" It was Angela, who had just arrived on the scene, her eyes flashing with fury as she saw her son in the officer's grip. Sergeant Reynolds, surprised, released Marcus, who ran stumbling into his mother's arms. For the first time, the officer felt a chill down his spine as he recognized the lawyer feared by the entire police force. The tension in the air was palpable. Neighborhood residents began to gather, murmurs of indignation growing in volume. Cell phones were pointed at the scene, capturing every moment of the incident. Angela, still holding Marcus tightly, stared at Sergeant Reynolds. Her voice, though low, carried the weight of a promise. "This won't stand, Sergeant. You have no idea what you've just awakened." The air seemed charged with electricity, the promise of retribution hanging over everyone present. What would happen next? How would Angela react to this act of violence against her own son? And what would be the consequences for Sergeant Reynolds and the community as a whole? The South Side neighborhood where Marcus and Angela lived was a mosaic of stories, hopes, and daily struggles. Narrow streets wound between simple houses, some dilapidated, others painted in vibrant colors that defied the oppression of poverty. It was a place where residents' solidarity contrasted sharply with the neglect of public authorities. Angela Davis, 38, carried in her eyes the determination of someone who had known injustice from an early age. The daughter of a domestic worker, she had studied at night, worked during the day, and earned her law degree through sheer grit and determination. Her dark skin and natural hair were a source of pride, a symbol of resistance in a world that frequently tried to diminish her. Angela's office, improvised in a room of her house, was a sanctuary of hope for many. The walls, lined with law books and human rights posters, bore witness to the countless legal battles she fought daily. There, amidst processes and petitions, she fought not just for justice, but for the dignity of an entire community. Marcus, her only child, was the center of her world. At 12, the boy already demonstrated the same curiosity and sense of justice as his mother. Intelligent and charismatic, Marcus was beloved by everyone in the neighborhood. His dark skin and bright eyes, inherited from his mother, contrasted with a wide smile that lit up any room. At school, Marcus stood out not only in grades, but also as a mediator of conflicts among his peers. He dreamed of becoming a judge one day, inspired by the stories he heard his mother tell about the injustices she fought. But like any child his age, he also loved playing in the street with friends, shooting hoops, and collecting basketball cards. On the other side of this universe was Sergeant John Reynolds, 45, a veteran of the Chicago Police Department. His face, marked by premature wrinkles, told the story of a hard life and difficult choices. The son of an alcoholic and violent father, Reynolds had joined the police seeking order and respect. But years of service in conflict-ridden areas had hardened his heart. Reynolds lived alone in a small apartment downtown. His walls, decorated with bravery medals and photos of old comrades in uniform, were silent witnesses to a career built on the belief that the world was divided between us and them. For Reynolds, the law was a tool to be imposed, not an ideal to be respected. In the neighborhood, Sergeant Reynolds' presence was feared. His patrol car, a white Ford Explorer with CPD markings, was seen as a harbinger of trouble. Residents had learned to disperse when he approached, fearing his aggressive and often discriminatory approaches. The tension between the community and the police was nothing new. Years of violent operations, abuses of authority, and cases of corruption had created an abyss of distrust. Angela was at the forefront of this battle, using the law as her weapon to protect residents' rights. The incident with Marcus was not an isolated event, but the spark that ignited a long, simmering conflict. The neighborhood streets, once the stage for children's games and conversations between neighbors, now became the setting for a larger battle for justice and dignity. As Angela embraced her trembling son, her eyes met Sergeant Reynolds's. At that moment, two worldviews collided. On one side, the tireless fight for rights and equality. On the other, the belief in an order maintained by force and fear. The entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Residents crowded at windows and on sidewalks, silent witnesses to a moment that promised to change the course of their lives. The air was charged not only with the smell of burnt fabric, but with the promise of imminent transformation. As news of the incident spread like wildfire, it was clear that the consequences would go far beyond this street. The community, long silenced, seemed ready to raise its voice. And at the center of this storm were Angela, Marcus, and Sergeant Reynolds, three lives intertwined by an act of violence that was about to unleash a wave of unpredictable changes. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the neighborhood, exposing the open wounds of a divided and unequal society. The consequences of this fateful encounter would reverberate far beyond that sweltering afternoon, triggering a series of events that would test the limits of justice, compassion, and vengeance. The sun was setting when Angela, with Marcus still trembling in her arms, entered the 21st District Police Station. The usual buzz of the precinct momentarily ceased, all eyes turning to the determined lawyer and her visibly shaken son. "I want to file a complaint against Sergeant John Reynolds for abuse of authority and attempted assault on a minor," Angela declared, her firm voice echoing through the lobby. The desk sergeant, recognizing her, hesitated for a moment before beginning to type. Meanwhile, in the streets of the South Side, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Groups of residents began to form on street corners, sharing videos recorded by witnesses. Indignation grew with each replay of the shocking images of Sergeant Reynolds holding a lighter to Marcus's shirt. At the Chicago Police Department headquarters, Captain Lisa Hernandez, Reynolds' direct superior, watched the same footage with a grave expression. "This is going to be a media nightmare," she muttered, reaching for the phone to call an emergency meeting. Sergeant Reynolds, now aware of the storm he had unleashed, took refuge in his apartment. Sitting in the dim light, a half-empty whiskey bottle in front of him, he mentally replayed the day's events. Part of him knew he had crossed a line, but another part, hardened by years of service, refused to admit the error. The next morning, the story was splashed across the front pages of local newspapers. Officer attempts to set child on fire in South Side. Social media exploded with hashtags like "You Justice for Marcus" and "Young CPD on Fire." Pressure for an official response grew by the minute. Angela, anticipating the battle ahead, called an impromptu press conference in front of her house. With Marcus by her side, she spoke eloquently about the history of police abuses in the neighborhood and how the incident with her son was just the tip of the iceberg. "We're not just seeking justice for Marcus," Angela declared, her voice heavy with emotion and determination. "We're demanding a complete overhaul of public safety policies and police training. Enough of violence against our community." Her words resonated beyond the South Side, reaching the corridors of power. The mayor, pressured by public opinion, announced the creation of a special commission to investigate the case and review police approach protocols. Meanwhile, within the police department, a silent battle was unfolding. Some officers, embarrassed by Reynolds' action, advocated for severe punishment. Others, fearing the precedent this could set, argued for a more lenient approach. Sergeant Reynolds, summoned to testify, arrived at Internal Affairs escorted and with his head down. In the corridors, fellow officers avoided him as if his mistake was contagious. In his statement, he tried to justify his actions as a misunderstanding and a moment of confusion, but his words rang hollow in the face of visual evidence. In the community, the incident had awakened a sense of unity long dormant. Led by Angela, residents organized peaceful protests, demanding not only punishment for Sergeant Reynolds, but structural changes in the relationship between the police and the South Side. Marcus, still traumatized by the incident, found comfort in the community's support. His friends and neighbors surrounded him with care, and he began to understand the power of his own story. With gentle guidance from his mother, he agreed to give an interview to a local newspaper, his young voice carrying a weight beyond his years. "I just wanted to play with my friends," Marcus said, his large eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. "Now, I want to make sure no other kid goes through what I did." As the week progressed, the case gained national proportions. Public safety experts, human rights activists, and politicians from all spheres weighed in on the matter. What had begun as an isolated incident on a Saturday afternoon was quickly becoming a catalyst for a national debate on racism, police violence, and the rights of marginalized communities. Angela, now a nationally recognized figure, balanced her time between caring for Marcus, leading local protests, and giving media interviews. She knew this was a crucial moment, a rare opportunity to provoke real change. At the center of this whirlwind, Sergeant Reynolds awaited his fate, isolated and increasingly aware of the weight of his actions. The decision about his punishment, still pending, promised to be a turning point not just for him, but for the entire structure of public safety in the city. As tension grew, it became clear that the outcome of this case would have repercussions far beyond the neighborhood where it all began. The community, the police, and society as a whole were about to face a moment of truth, a point of no return that would require everyone to deeply reflect on justice, equality, and the true meaning of serving and protecting. As Marcus's case gained national attention, several subplots began to unfold, adding layers of complexity to the already tense situation. At the police station, Lieutenant James O'Connor, a middle-aged man known for his integrity, faced an internal battle. A long-time friend of Sergeant Reynolds, he found himself torn between personal loyalty and professional duty. In a tense conversation with his wife, he confided, "How can I judge a man I've known for 20 years for one moment of error?" His wife, an elementary school teacher, simply replied, "And how can you not judge a man who almost burned a child?" Meanwhile, in the mayor's office, a heated discussion was taking place. The communications director, Sarah, argued for Reynolds's immediate dismissal, aiming to calm public opinion. "It's a matter of image, Mr. Mayor. We need to show swift action." The police commissioner, however, warned about the risks of a hasty decision. "If we act without due process, we could face a rebellion in the force." The mayor, feeling the weight of the decision, knew that any choice would have significant consequences for his political career. In the community, an unexpected subplot emerged when Mrs. Johnson, the elderly lady who had shouted "thief" on the day of the incident, sought out Angela. Consumed by guilt, Johnson confessed through tears, "I wasn't even sure if it was a real thief. I was scared and shouted without thinking." This new element added a layer of moral complexity to the case, raising questions about collective responsibility and the dangers of hasty judgments. At Marcus's school, his classmates dealt with the repercussions of the incident in various ways. Some, inspired by Marcus's courage, formed a student group against police violence. Others, children of police officers, felt isolated and unfairly judged, creating a palpable tension in the school environment. The local media, represented by investigative journalist Michael Chen, began to dig deeper into Sergeant Reynolds' history. He uncovered a pattern of previous complaints against Reynolds, all filed away without significant consequences. Why were these complaints ignored for so long? Chen questioned in his blog, raising suspicions about possible corruption or negligence within the department. At the local hospital, Dr. Emily Rodriguez, who had treated Marcus, faced an ethical dilemma. The boy's burns, though minor, could leave scars. The doctor wondered if she should exaggerate the severity of the injuries in her report to ensure the case was taken seriously. Her professional conscience struggled against her desire for justice. An unexpected subplot arose when Jamal, a young local rapper, released a viral song on social media narrating the incident. The song, with its hard-hitting lyrics and catchy rhythm, quickly became an unofficial anthem of the movement, further amplifying the case's visibility. At the neighborhood church, Reverend Thomas found himself at the center of a moral debate. Some parishioners asked him to publicly condemn Sergeant Reynolds' act, while others argued for the importance of Christian forgiveness. The Reverend, in his sermons, tried to balance the message of justice with that of compassion, reflecting the moral complexity of the situation. In a surprising development, Karen, Sergeant Reynolds' ex-wife, reached out to Angela. She revealed years of Reynolds' abusive behavior at home, offering to testify about his violent temperament. This revelation added a new dimension to the sergeant's profile, raising questions about the intersection of domestic violence and police brutality. As these subplots intertwined, it became clear that the incident had touched exposed nerves in society, revealing long-ignored tensions and contradictions. Each new revelation, each decision made, each opinion expressed, contributed to an increasingly complex picture, challenging simplistic notions of right and wrong. The pressure of time intensified. A decision on Sergeant Reynolds' fate needed to be made, and quickly. But with so many voices clamoring for attention, so many perspectives to be considered, the path to justice seemed increasingly nebulous. How would Angela, Marcus, and the community navigate this labyrinth of emotions, interests, and unforeseen consequences? The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only determine the fate of those directly involved, but also potentially reshape the relationship between law enforcement and marginalized communities across the nation. The turning point arrived on a rainy Wednesday, exactly 10 days after the incident. The city was in suspense, awaiting the internal affairs decision on Sergeant Reynolds' fate. However, that morning, a series of unexpected events would drastically change the course of the story. It all began when an anonymous video was sent to journalist Michael Chen. The footage, captured by a security camera, showed the exact moment of the incident with Marcus, but from a different angle. This new video revealed a crucial detail that had gone unnoticed. Seconds before approaching Marcus, Sergeant Reynolds had received a call on his personal cell phone. Chen, recognizing the importance of the discovery, immediately contacted Angela. Together, they decided to take the information directly to Captain Hernandez, who ordered an immediate investigation into Reynolds' phone records. What followed was a cascade of revelations that shook the foundations of the police department. The records showed that the call Reynolds received had come from a number associated with a known drug dealer in the area. Moreover, a detailed analysis of Reynolds' call history revealed a pattern of communication with various criminal elements over the past few months. The news spread like wildfire. What had begun as a case of police abuse was now transforming into a corruption scandal of unimaginable proportions. Sergeant Reynolds wasn't just a violent cop. He was a piece in a much larger puzzle of corruption and collusion with organized crime. As the city digested this new information, Marcus, inspired by his mother's courage and the community's support, made a surprising decision. He asked to speak publicly at a hastily organized press conference. With cameras pointed at him and his mother by his side, Marcus, his voice trembling but determined, shared his story. He spoke not only about the terror he felt that day, but also about his dreams for a better future. For a community where children like him could play without fear. "I don't want revenge," Marcus said, surprising everyone. "I want change. I want other police officers to see what happened and choose to be different. I want them to truly protect us." The boy's words, broadcast live across the country, touched hearts and minds in a way that no political speech or legal analysis had managed to do. The innocence and wisdom in his speech created a moment of collective clarity. Meanwhile, Sergeant Reynolds, confronted with evidence of his corruption, collapsed. In a moment of desperation, he attempted to flee the city, only to be detained at a highway checkpoint. The image of the once respected sergeant being handcuffed by his own colleagues became a powerful symbol of the fall of the old order. The mayor, realizing the magnitude of the moment, called an emergency meeting with community leaders, including Angela. For the first time, representatives from the South Side were seated at the decision-making table, their voices not just heard, but actively sought. In this meeting, a proposal for a radical reform of the city's police department was born. The changes would include not only a new system of supervision and accountability, but also human rights training programs and community relations for all officers. The community, energized by this unexpected turn of events, organized a candlelight vigil in front of the police station. What began as a protest transformed into a cautious celebration of hope. Residents, activists, and even some progressive police officers united, sharing stories and visions for a better future. Angela, standing in the middle of the crowd, with Marcus by her side, looked around and saw something she didn't expect. The beginning of real change. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she felt they were on the right track. As night fell over the city, a palpable sense of transformation hung in the air. The case that had begun with an act of violence against a child had unfolded into an opportunity to rewrite the rules of engagement between the police and the community. The turning point wasn't just about the fall of a corrupt officer or the exposure of a flawed system. It was about the awakening of an entire community to its own power and the real possibility of systemic change. As Marcus fell asleep that night, exhausted but hopeful, Angela remained awake, planning the next steps. She knew this was just the beginning of a long journey, but she was determined to see it through, not just for her son, but for all the children who deserved to grow up without fear. The city stood on the brink of a new era, one where justice and community cooperation might finally take precedence over fear and prejudice. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time in years, there was a genuine sense of hope permeating the streets of the South Side. In the weeks following the turning point, the city experienced a series of rapid and profound changes, some expected, others surprising. The first and most immediate consequence was Sergeant Reynolds's preventive arrest. The evidence of his corruption was irrefutable, and he now faced not only charges related to the incident with Marcus, but also a series of accusations of association with organized crime. The image of the former sergeant being escorted to prison, head bowed and handcuffed, circulated widely, symbolizing for many the end of an era of impunity. In the police department, a veritable revolution was underway. Captain Hernandez, recognizing her failure to detect the corruption under her command, submitted her resignation. In her place, Deputy Chief Alicia Ramirez was appointed, a respected officer known for her commitment to police reform and community engagement. Her first action was to initiate a complete audit of the department, resulting in the suspension of several officers suspected of misconduct. The community, in turn, experienced a complex mixture of emotions. There was a sense of victory and empowerment, especially among the youth who felt inspired by Marcus's courage. Discussion groups on civil rights and police accountability began to form in community centers and schools. However, there was also tension. Some residents, especially those with family members in the police force, felt unfairly under suspicion. There were reports of honest police officers being harassed on the streets, creating a new set of challenges for rebuilding trust between the police and the community. Angela found herself at the center of a media storm. Invitations for interviews and speaking engagements arrived daily. She became a national voice in the fight against police abuse and racial discrimination. However, this new fame brought its own challenges. Anonymous threats began to arrive, forcing her to consider security measures for her family. Marcus, now seen as a symbol of resistance and hope, faced his own struggles. At school, he oscillated between moments of newfound confidence and episodes of anxiety. Some classmates treated him like a hero, others avoided him, fearing the attention he attracted. The school principal, recognizing Marcus's unique situation, implemented psychological support programs, not just for him, but for all students affected by recent events. On the political scene, the case catalyzed significant changes. The mayor, sensing the historic moment, proposed a series of reforms in public safety. Among them was the creation of a civilian police oversight board with elected community representatives. This proposal, though celebrated by activists, met resistance from more conservative sectors and the police union. Local and national media continued to closely follow the developments. Michael Chen, who had been instrumental in exposing the case, published a series of investigative articles about police culture in the city. His work not only won awards but also sparked important discussions about the role of the press in overseeing public power. In the judicial sphere, Marcus's case set important precedents. The district attorney's office, inspired by the wave of changes, began reviewing old cases of police abuse that had been archived. Several families, encouraged by Angela's success, came forward with their own stories of injustice. Meanwhile, in the South Side, a subtle but significant transformation was occurring. Residents, feeling more empowered, began to organize into more active neighborhood associations. Community projects from urban gardens to mentoring programs for young people flourished. There was a renewed sense of pride and collective responsibility. However, not all changes were positive. With the fall of Sergeant Reynolds and the destabilization of his corruption network, a power vacuum formed in the criminal underworld. Rival gangs began to dispute territory, leading to a temporary increase in violence in certain areas. As these multiple consequences unfolded, it became clear that the city was undergoing a profound and irreversible transformation. Marcus's case had removed the lid from a Pandora's box of long-ignored social issues. Now, for better or worse, these issues were exposed, demanding attention and action. Angela, observing all of this, knew that the real work was just beginning. Real change, she realized, would come not just from laws and policies, but from a fundamental transformation in how people viewed each other and their community. The city stood at a crossroads, with the potential for either significant progress or deeper division. The coming months would be crucial in determining which path it would take. The months that followed were a period of intense transformation, not just for the city, but especially for Marcus and his family. The process of healing and growth, both personal and collective, was in full swing. For Marcus, the journey of overcoming began with therapy. Initially reluctant, he soon discovered that weekly sessions with Dr. Sarah Thompson, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma, were a safe space to process his emotions. Gradually, Marcus learned to deal with recurring nightmares and moments of panic that sometimes struck him in public spaces. A significant turning point for Marcus occurred during a school project about personal heroes. While many of his classmates chose celebrities or historical figures, Marcus decided to talk about his mother, Angela. As he prepared his presentation, he not only recognized his mother's strength and courage, but also began to see his own resilience in a new light. Marcus's presentation moved his classmates and teachers alike. He spoke not just about the incident, but about the aftermath, the struggle for justice, the community's support, and the changes they were fighting for. His words inspired his peers to think more deeply about social issues and their role in creating change. Angela, meanwhile, faced her own challenges. The sudden fame and growing responsibilities as a community leader often left her exhausted and overwhelmed. Recognizing the need to take care of herself to continue her work, she began practicing meditation and joined a support group for activists. A crucial moment in Angela's growth came when she was invited to speak at a national conference on police reform. Initially insecure, she found her voice by sharing not just Marcus's story, but also the stories of so many other families affected by police violence. Her emotional and eloquent speech not only moved the audience, but also caught the attention of influential lawmakers. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and interviews, Angela found Marcus waiting up for her. "Mom," he said, his voice serious, "I want to start a youth group at school to teach kids about their rights and how to make change." Angela's eyes welled with tears of pride. Her son was not just overcoming his trauma, he was transforming it into a force for good. In the community, the collective healing process took various forms. A group of young artists, inspired by recent events, created a community mural depicting the neighborhood's journey from oppression to hope. The project became a meeting point for dialogues about identity, justice, and the future. Marcus's school implemented a new curriculum focused on civil rights and civic engagement. Students were encouraged to think critically about social issues and develop projects to improve their community. Marcus, finding a new purpose, became one of the most active student leaders, organizing debates and awareness campaigns. At the police department, Deputy Chief Ramirez faced the difficult task of changing a deeply rooted institutional culture. She implemented mandatory training programs on implicit bias and conflict de-escalation. More significantly, she initiated a community policing program where officers were encouraged to build positive relationships with residents. One of the most powerful moments of growth came when Deputy Chief Ramirez organized a meeting between police officers and community youth, including Marcus. The event, initially tense, evolved into a frank and moving dialogue. Many officers, hearing the experiences of young people for the first time, began to re-evaluate their approaches and prejudices. Marcus, in particular, surprised everyone with his maturity when speaking directly to the officers. "I don't want to be afraid of you," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I want to be able to count on you to protect me, just as you should be able to count on our community to support you." These words had a profound impact, not just on those present, but across the city, when the video of the meeting went viral. It was a living testimony to the power of open communication and mutual empathy. As time passed, subtle but significant changes began to manifest. Crime rates in the area began to fall, not due to aggressive policing tactics, but thanks to a combination of better community relations and prevention programs. Complaints of police misconduct decreased, while positive community evaluations of the police gradually increased. For Marcus, a particularly powerful moment of growth came when he was invited to speak at a graduation ceremony for new police officers. Before an audience of young officers, he shared his story and his vision for a future where police and community worked together in harmony. "What happened to me was terrible," he said, "but it doesn't define who I am or who you are. What defines us are the choices we make from now on. You have the power to make a difference, to be the guardians our community needs and deserves." His words were received with a standing ovation, symbolizing a new chapter in the relationship between the police force and the community. Angela, watching her son with pride, reflected on the extraordinary journey they had taken. The incident that had almost destroyed their lives had transformed into a catalyst for positive changes that went far beyond them. As the city continued its journey of healing and transformation, Marcus and Angela became living symbols of resilience, forgiveness, and hope. Their story was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, growth and positive change were possible. 2 years had passed since the incident that changed Marcus's life and shook the foundations of the city. The date of the final trial of former Sergeant Reynolds was approaching, bringing with it a mixture of anxiety and expectation that permeated the entire community. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the city lived in a climate of growing tension. Local and national media began to converge, reigniting public interest in the case. Journalists roamed the streets of Marcus's neighborhood, seeking new perspectives and updates on how the community had changed. Angela, now a prominent figure in social activism circles, found herself in the eye of the hurricane. She spent her days in meetings with lawyers, preparing her testimony and strategizing with other activists. Her nights were dedicated to calming Marcus, who was beginning to feel the weight of renewed attention. Marcus, now 14, faced his own challenges. The teenager emerging from the trauma of 2 years ago was stronger, but also carried invisible scars. The prospect of seeing Sergeant Reynolds in court brought up memories he struggled to overcome. On a particularly difficult night, Marcus confessed to his mother, "What if I'm not strong enough to face him again?" Angela, with tears in her eyes, hugged her son and replied, "Your strength isn't in not being afraid, but in doing what's right despite the fear." On the eve of the trial, a silent vigil was organized in the neighborhood. Hundreds of people gathered, holding candles and signs calling for justice. The event, which began in silence, gradually transformed into an impromptu forum where community members shared their stories and hopes for the future. Meanwhile, in downtown Chicago, the climate was equally tense but for different reasons. The police union organized a rally in support of Reynolds, arguing that he was being used as a scapegoat for systemic problems. This clear division between the community's perspectives and part of the police force highlighted how much still needed to be done in terms of reconciliation and reform. Deputy Chief Ramirez, now firmly established in her leadership position in the police department, faced her own dilemma. She knew her testimony at the trial would be crucial, but she was also aware that her critical stance towards Reynolds and the previous system could alienate some of her officers. In a tense meeting with her command team, she reaffirmed her commitment to truth and justice, regardless of personal or political consequences. The night before the trial, heavy rain fell on the city, as if the sky itself was trying to wash away the accumulated tensions. Marcus, unable to sleep, stood at his bedroom window, watching the raindrops stream down the glass. Each drop seemed to carry a fragment of his story, a memory of what had happened, and a hope of what might come. Angela found her son there, and together they shared a moment of contemplative silence. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "isn't about revenge. It's about justice and ensuring that what happened to you never happens to another child." Meanwhile, in his cell, former Sergeant Reynolds also spent a sleepless night. The man who once saw himself as a guardian of the law now faced the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars. In a rare moment of introspection, he wondered how and when things had gone so wrong. On the morning of the trial, The city awoke with palpable energy in the air. The streets leading to the courthouse were crowded from early on, with demonstrators from both sides taking their positions. Television crews set up their equipment, preparing to broadcast live what promised to be one of the most significant trials in the city's recent history. Inside the courthouse, lawyers on both sides made their final preparations. The prosecutor reviewed his notes, determined to ensure justice was served. Reynolds' defense attorney, on the other hand, prepared to argue that his client was a product of a flawed system rather than a malicious individual. As the hour of the trial approached, Marcus and Angela prepared to leave their home. Dressed formally and holding hands, they exchanged a look of mutual determination. The moment that would define not only their future, but potentially the future of the entire community had arrived. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only determine the fate of those directly involved, but could potentially reshape the relationship between law enforcement and marginalized communities across the nation. The courtroom was packed when Marcus and Angela entered, escorted by court officers. The buzz in the room momentarily ceased, all eyes turning to the young boy whose story had captured the nation's attention. Marcus, visibly nervous but determined, held his head high as he walked down the center aisle. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, called the court to order. "We are here today for the case of the state versus John Reynolds, former sergeant of the Chicago Police Department," she announced, her voice resonating through the silent room. The prosecutor, District Attorney Michael Brennan, opened the proceedings with a powerful speech. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not just about an isolated incident of police brutality. It's about a system that allowed such abuse to occur and flourish. It's about the broken trust between those who swore to protect and the community they were meant to serve." The defense, led by the experienced attorney James Harper, countered, painting Reynolds as a product of a flawed system. "My client is not a monster, but a man who was shaped by years of service in extremely stressful conditions, without adequate support and training." As witnesses were called, the tension in the room increased. Police officers, community residents, and experts in use of force offered their testimonies, each adding a new layer of complexity to the case. The most anticipated moment came when Marcus was called to testify. The 14-year-old boy took the stand, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. With a voice that trembled at first but gained strength with each word, Marcus recounted the events of that fateful day. "I was just playing with my friends," he said, his eyes briefly meeting Reynolds, "and suddenly I felt someone grab me. When I saw the lighter, I had never felt so scared in my life." The courtroom was in absolute silence, absorbing every word. Marcus continued, describing not just the incident but its lasting impact. "For a long time I had nightmares. I was afraid to go out on the street. But then I realized that staying afraid wouldn't change anything. I wanted to make a difference." During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to suggest that Marcus might have misinterpreted Reynolds' actions, but the young boy stood firm in his testimony. The turning point of the trial came with the surprise testimony of Karen, Reynolds' ex-wife. Her revelation about Reynolds' history of abusive behavior at home shed new light on the former sergeant's character. When it was Reynolds' turn to testify, the room grew tense. The former sergeant, now a shadow of the imposing man he once was, took the stand. His initial attempt to justify his actions quickly crumbled under the prosecutor's incisive questioning. In a moment of emotional breakdown, Reynolds finally admitted, I lost control. I spent years seeing the worst of humanity, and it turned me into something I no longer recognize." The climax of the trial came with the closing arguments. The prosecutor, in an impassioned speech, asked the jury to send a clear message. No child should live in fear of those who swore to protect them. This is not just the trial of one man, but of a system that failed its community. The defense made a final plea for mercy, arguing that Reynolds was as much a victim as a perpetrator of a broken system. As the jury retired to deliberate, the tension in the room was palpable. Marcus and Angela waited hand in hand, their faces reflecting the anxiety everyone felt. After hours that seemed like an eternity, the jury returned. The silence that fell over the courtroom was deafening. The jury, four-person, a middle-aged woman with a grave expression, stood to read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, John Reynolds, guilty on all charges." A collective murmur ran through the room. Marcus closed his eyes, a mixture of relief and emotion on his face. Angela hugged him tightly, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Reynolds, upon hearing the verdict, lowered his head, the weight of his actions finally seeming to fall on his shoulders. The judge, maintaining order in the room, delivered the sentence, 15 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 10 years, plus permanent loss of the right to serve as a law enforcement officer. As Reynolds was led away, Marcus stood up. In a gesture that surprised everyone, he walked towards the former sergeant. For a moment, their gazes met. No words were exchanged, but something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement, perhaps even the first step towards some form of reconciliation. As they left the courthouse, Marcus and Angela were greeted by a crowd of supporters. The scene was one of collective relief and muted celebration. This wasn't just the end of a trial, but the beginning of a new chapter for the entire community. As cameras flashed and reporters jostled for statements, Marcus looked at his mother and said softly, "Is it over?" Angela, with a gentle smile, replied, "No, son. Now is when the real work begins." In the months following the trial, Chicago underwent a profound and lasting transformation. Marcus's case had become a catalyst for long-needed changes, not just in policing, but in the entire social structure of the community. The police department, under Deputy Chief Ramirez's leadership, implemented comprehensive reforms. New training protocols focused on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity became mandatory. A community oversight board was established, giving residents an active voice in public safety policies. Marcus, now 15, became a symbol of resilience and hope. He began participating in mentoring programs for at-risk youth, using his experience to inspire others to overcome adversity. His presence in schools and community centers was always met with enthusiasm and respect. Angela expanded her advocacy work, founding a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting social justice and criminal justice reform. Her tireless efforts began to attract national attention, leading to invitations to speak at universities and participate in governmental commissions. The South Side neighborhood, where it all began, experienced a remarkable revitalization. Community development programs, many inspired by Marcus's story, flourished. Youth recreation centers, civic education programs, and local entrepreneurship initiatives transformed the physical and social landscape of the area. A particularly moving moment occurred when Marcus was invited to speak at the Police Academy graduation ceremony. Before a new generation of officers, he shared his story not as an indictment, but as a call for compassion and mutual understanding. "What happened to me doesn't have to define the future," Marcus told the cadets. "You have the power to write a new chapter in police-community relations, a chapter of respect, understanding, and true partnership." The impact of the case extended beyond the city limits. State and federal lawmakers began using Marcus's story as a case study to propose broader reforms in the criminal justice system. Meanwhile, former Sergeant Reynolds, serving his sentence, began a process of reflection and remorse. He started working with rehabilitation programs in prison, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of abuse of power and prejudice. On a quiet afternoon, 5 years after the incident, Marcus and Angela sat on their front porch, reflecting on the journey they had taken. The neighborhood around them was almost unrecognizable, more vibrant, safer, more united. "Mom," said Marcus, his voice heavy with emotion, "do you think we made a difference?" Angela smiled, looking at the children playing freely on the street, at the police officers patrolling on foot and chatting amicably with residents. "Yes, my son, she replied. "We did more than make a difference. We changed the course of history." As the sun set over the city, illuminating the sky with hues of hope, it was clear that Marcus's story was not just about overcoming adversity. It was a testament to the power of resilience, the strength of community, and the possibility of transforming even the most painful experiences into catalysts for positive and lasting change. The legacy of that traumatic day had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that justice, when pursued with determination and compassion, could indeed prevail and transform an entire community. 10 years after the incident, Marcus, now a newly graduated lawyer, walked the streets of his old neighborhood. The changes were visible: renovated parks, well-equipped schools, and an atmosphere of harmony between residents and local police. Passing by the police station, Marcus noticed a commemorative plaque that told the story of the city's transformation. His name was there, along with his mother's and others who fought for change. A young police officer greeted him with respect. Marcus smiled, realizing that his journey, though begun in pain, had paved the way for a more just and compassionate future for all. Hey folks, if you've made it this far, it means you've followed every moment of this incredible journey. Marcus's story shows us that change is possible, but it depends on each one of us. What did you think? Did this narrative touch your heart? Did it make you reflect on the injustices around us? Don't keep these reflections to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this inspiring dialogue alive. And don't forget, if you watched until the end, comment, "I watched it all the way through." Your participation matters. Oh, and stay tuned for the video that will appear on the end screen. There's more amazing content waiting for you.